morning, everyone. It's such a privilege to be facilitating this discussion, an issue very close to my heart, which delves into redefining the meaning of leadership in law and justice. Our brilliant panel, lawyers, academics, lawmakers, will talk about the challenges faced by women to enter leadership and decision-making spaces, and how media, workplaces, and the public can reshape the narratives. Co-Impact facilitates a coalition of organizations working to advance women in leadership in the law. Chuma and Japa represent the coalition, and please do reach out to them if you're keen to learn more about how to be involved. We need all the help we can get, especially the non-lawyers. To start off our discussion, I'd like to ask each of you, how are you changing the narrative at an institutional level and also at a narrative level to shift and promote women's leadership in law and decision-making spaces? Congresswoman, maybe you can start us off.
Well, thank you so very much. I was trained as a rebellious lawyer, right? And what is the most rebellious thing we can do as lawyers, as legislators, as friends? Listen. Right? And so I think that as we go about the work we do, we must always start with that incredibly rebellious act that's also an act of love, which is listen.
Thank you. I think for me, at a narrative level, would be to understand that life and inevitably our careers are not linear. I think from that standpoint, it's very important for women to give themselves the grace to discover what the grace to grow and discover what leadership means for them, and not to be what leadership means for themselves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm happy to be here, and I thank the organizers for this wonderful forum. I think mine also links back to one thing, combining all the resources you have in you. I trained as a lawyer in Ghana, and I ended up with a PhD in political science. So today I'm an academic. How do I bring those two worlds together? As a lawyer who understands women's issues in law, and as an academic who does research on women in law, I have combined these two skills and more in order to document the lives and impact of women in law in order to change the narrative.
Thank you so much. I love all of those kind of suggestions. Being a rebellious lawyer, that we don't have to only be one type of lawyer, as Chuma was saying, that your career path isn't linear. And exactly as you said, you can be a lawyer, an academic, a storyteller. So thank you all for kind of setting that's scene for us, that women leadership in the law is not one thing. And Congresswoman, just to dive deeper, looking back over the last decade, what has changed for women in leadership in the law, and looking ahead, what still needs to be done?
So, I think that as I look and struggle to answer that question and set a context, I can't ignore what we just went through in the United States as lawmakers, and as the fact that we were unable to elect a brilliant lawyer and prosecutor. And I sometimes go back to something my grandmother used to say, which is that when you educate a man, you have an educated man. When you educate a woman, you have an educated family, right? And that part of what we are working on is to make sure that we can take the concept of the education that women take, that concept of the manner in which women share and include into our politics, into our law. And I'm struggling with the fact that Democrats did some important things for working families that we didn't maybe get credit for. And it's our fault, right? And there's lots of things. I look at this equal pay, right? Ending gender violence, all of these things. We worked really hard on that child care issues, right? That is about bringing costs down. And yet we heard that we lost because we didn't address these economic issues. Let me take one thing that we did, that Democrats did. Of all the many things we did addressing working families, many things. One was, we passed a law and we took 50% of the children in poverty of the United States out of poverty. We took 75% of the Native American children out of poverty. Republicans threw those children back into poverty because they refused to extend the child tax credit. We failed to communicate, to tell the story of how that policy decision that we made affected their lives. We failed as Democrats, as campaigners, to say, this is what it meant. So we failed in our storytelling. We failed to make sure that women who maybe voted for the party that threw their children back into poverty understood that. And so I think that part of what I'm going to do, I am presently the vice chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. We need to give a little bit of a shout out because we have increased the number of women in Congress, almost less than, yes, we did. We have about less than 100 Democratic women congresswomen who will be joining us. We don't know what's happened to the House, as Chrissy noted. But as one of the leaders in the Democratic Women's Caucus, I'm going to dedicate myself to make sure that we start telling those stories and that those stories come up in places where people are getting their information, that they become emotional and they become real. Because you can't talk about the tax credit policy. Who's going to pay attention to that? You need to say, what does it mean in my life? And how do we tell that story in a way that resonates? And how do we get it? I know we're going to talk about that later, but how do we get it to the places that it's not getting? Because perhaps some of those oligarchs who control the platforms don't want those stories told in a manner that is emotional and inspirational. We're going to become guerrilla storytellers about the impacts of the Republican policies on the women, children, and families that we care about.
Thank you so much. I love that. Guerrilla storytellers.
Guerrilla storytellers.
And I think that's so important, is what you're saying, and what, Japa, you'd alluded to as well, that it's not just about being a lawyer and doing your job. It's not about just looking at the numbers of women lawyers, but actually, when we are in positions of power, what are we doing to communicate that? What are we doing to actually share and change these narratives? So thank you for bringing in that storytelling. We have to be lawyers and guerrilla storytellers as well. And Japa, maybe building upon what the Congresswoman has said, maybe you can speak about one or two groundbreaking solutions or strategies that have worked to move from these singular firsts, first woman lawyer, first woman judge, to institutional and substantive change for all women.
All right, thank you. So I would like to speak on two key issues, 1 to 2, as you mentioned. There are many, but I'll focus on two. One is data-driven research. And the second one is data-driven advocacy. What do these mean? Once again, going back into who I am or who I train to be, I call myself an unapologetic feminist who was brought up by a non-educated grandmother and mother. My mom was educated, who my grandmother taught me to be a feminist. I have grown up and I call myself a legal scholar, a socio-legal scholar, and I call myself a scholar activist. What do all these mean? That means that in my work and in the work of many other people, we know that fact, women are leaders. Fact, women are excellent leaders. Fact, women can change the world and can change systems. And they have done all these. But most often, we do not know who these women are, what they have done, and the impact of what they have done. So my role as a social, legal, feminist, and unapologetic African scholar is to use data. I don't have to convince you as a lawyer in a courtroom. I can convince you through my work as an academic, through my academic activism. And I have done that in a very rebellious way by publishing about the stories of African women in law, using data, showcasing that not only did we have a first woman judge in Ghana, first woman lawyer in Ghana, but that we also had a first woman chief justice, we have had a second woman chief justice, and we are on our third woman chief justice in Ghana. How many people often know these details? My data that is available, which I document, also shows that across the continent of Africa, we have had the most women chief justices than anywhere else in the world. So all these is to showcase that even though there has been success, these women still have challenges in leadership, as we've heard women talk about today. And so how do we use data to showcase that there has been success, there has been progress, And there are still problems that we need to resolve. So number one, data-driven research. I have published 4 books on women judges in Africa. I'm on the 4th and the 5th coming out next year. And they tell the real life stories of women. We are not making it up. 2, data-driven activism. I use the research we have, the data we gather, the stories we have made, and we use that as a tool for advocacy. So the Institute for African Women in Law conducted a comprehensive study across the continent to understand the situation of women in law. There is good news and there is bad news. So we called it "Is the glass half full?" We are looking to see how we can fill the gap on leadership. The advocacy, which we call the Gender Equality in Law campaign, was launched in Accra in July. We took it from Accra to Addis, and Addis Ababa is the capital of Ethiopia, where the African Union sits. So we have gone from the national institutional level to the regional level, and we're saying this is what the data show. There's progress, but there are challenges. And we identify the 4 grounds on which we need to address equal pay, equal promotion, gender-based stereotypes, and the 4th one, which I've just blanked out on. But it's all on our website. So once again, all this to showcase the 2 points that I want to raise. That when we use data, we can showcase success, we can showcase where challenges exist, and we don't just stop at data, but we also engage in activism to draw awareness, to call allies men to be part of the change that we want to see, but most importantly, we have created a model gender equality in law policy that says from now onwards, you have no excuse, law firms or judiciaries or institutions of higher education. Here you go. We have a model policy for you. Implement it, and let's begin to see the change so we can drive more women into leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Japa, and I really encourage all of you to visit the Institute for African Women in Law website. Not only does it document some of these historical firsts, the first women lawyers and judges, and I'm from Zambia, and actually the first woman lawyer, it's not known. There's no statue, there's no road named after her, and I'm sure that's the same in many of your countries. But also, actually, the research reports you've done showcasing the barriers for women around sexual harassment, for example, as well, and this campaign. And I'm sure Japa wants many of you to join the campaign, so please do kind of follow her website. And Chima, coming to you to kind of help to unpack some of these challenges that, based off the research that Japa is doing, we do see more women enrolled in law and economics courses now at the university level, which is something to celebrate. But when it gets to the mid-career level, we see retention and promotion much more challenging. What challenges did you face working at a private law firm, and what do you think still needs to change?
Thanks, Sabrina. That's true. For example, in my graduating class at the University of Cape Town, more than 60% of my class was women. But as we moved into private practice law firms, as you move and see from senior associate and partner level, the number of women starts to decrease, although the number that graduated was quite high. The challenges that I faced kind of come at the intersection of being both black and a woman in South Africa. I think first would be briefing patterns. The partners, male partners particularly, kind of briefing patterns as per the boys' club. Partners briefing other men on more complex transactions and kind of not really including young women or training them, as well as just feeling like you had to work twice as hard just to be recognized and to show yourself as capable, and only after that would you be given a chance, whereas your male counterparts were kind of just assumed as capable from the get-go. What I would suggest is, or kind of what I would think of as solutions to those issues is twofold. Firstly, our South African government has there are a lot of equality laws in our country that do require equal representation as per the demographic of the country in the workplace. However, I think that biases that still exist within the legal community, legal fraternity, need to really change. Although we have laws that protect women and protect black people, unfortunately, we're not really seeing that in practice. And I really think that we need to work harder at changing the perceptions and putting more institutional practices in place, which will ensure that women are promoted, are trained equally, and therefore can have equally successful careers.
Thank you so much. So, I think there's still a lot to do, and I think that's important because sometimes we see these numbers and we're like, oh, well, this is great. We have more women studying law, we have more women lawyers, but really these underlying systemic issues are still problematic. And just to follow up, Chima, you have been a Clooney Foundation Fellow, and what role do you see in terms of mentorship and sort of like women later on in the careers supporting like the women who are entering the profession? What can we do better?
Thank you, Sabrina. I think mentorship is very, very important, and I think kind of matched with the mentorship that we all understand is a concept where young women lawyers will be actively trained, where your supervisor really invests in your career, really cares about the matters that you want to get involved in, what you'd like to learn, and makes sure that they adequately train you to be at your best and optimal level. We all know, and has been spoken throughout this morning, that women are as capable as anybody else. With the right training and investment, I think women will succeed. So understanding mentorship alongside a more practical way in which we ensure that young women lawyers will continue to grow.
Thank you, and I think that's sort of a rallying call for all of us. Many of us here in this room are mentors or can be mentors, but how do we go beyond mentorship to that real kind of practical support and kind of, almost like day-by-day coaching and time investment? So thank you for those suggestions. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up this conversation, though I think we could talk about it all day. It's so important. But maybe I could ask our panel to leave us with one solution, action, or pathway that is very urgent and still needs to be implemented to redefine women's leadership in law. Congresswoman.
So what we know is that for New Mexico, for example, we have a majority of our justices are indeed women. But they were appointed, and there is a political process that impacts judiciary in the United States. And so therefore, we need to go back to the fact that elections are so key. And so I'm going to go back to my grandmother, which is you educate a woman, you educate a family. It is women's stories that are going to educate women, and then those women are going to educate the men in their lives. And then we are going to begin the process, and we have 2 years in the United States, I'm speaking for the United States, where we will be in opposition. But with those stories, I think that we will have a different outcome 2 years from now. And I think what we all need to do is share stories of inspiration, because sometimes stories of inspiration spread, and stories of love can spread as powerfully as stories of fear. And we need to place blame where blame goes, but then we need to be inspired and come from a place of love. So that we switch the electoral outcome, so we switch the issue with regards who are making those decisions of law.
Thank you, and I know for many of our US sisters, this has felt very heavy, and actually for the world, and I think really want to say thank you to the Reykjavik Forum, because being here, listening to stories, being inspired, has given us all a bit more courage to continue fighting, so thank you. Chima, what's your one suggestion for us?
I think my one suggestion would be kind of linked to the point that I made about mentorship. Just really continuing to invest in young women and really investing in their careers, training them, upskilling them, and being aware of not tiptoeing around the fact that there are biases that people have in their minds, but really being aware of those biases and then thinking about, okay, what are the practical steps that I can put into my training or my mentorship to ensure that I'm working against that and really promoting the next generation of young women.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Chima. You're such an inspiring person for us. When we look at the future of the law, I think of you. And thank you for that reminder that, yes, when we are thinking about what we're doing, we need to have a very intersectional lens at it. So very important. And Japa, to you.
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you for mentioning sexual harassment, which is a fourth pillar. So you really are following the Institute. Thank you. My closing remark will be drawn from what we call the African proverb. And I say African because it's not across. For all Africa, it's not a country, it's 54 nation states, but we all tend to share certain common experiences. And this proverb says, when sleeping women wake, mountains move. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe two proverbs. A second one, which is more linked to South Africa, says that when you strike a woman, you strike a rock. So what do these mean? Women are powerful. Women may not be sleeping, but they may have been put to sleep by systems and norms. Now we are all waking up. The Reykjavik Foundation and many Forum and many others have provided us with opportunities to wake up. And now that we are awake, we are going to make change happen. So philanthropists, organizations, individuals, invest and continue to invest and support women's organizations because we are up, we are going to move, and mountains will move with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you're right, we need philanthropy as well. We need everybody in this movement. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their really insightful perspectives. If you do want to delve deeper into this issue, there's a further discussion today at 11, well, shortly afterwards. The timing has been extended a little bit. But there's another deeper talk on women leadership in the law. And tomorrow there's a talk by the Gates Foundation as well. And to create change, we really need this diverse and strong coalitions to not just change the face of the law, but really to shape justice and equality for generations to come. So thank you all.